Hello, my wonderful viewers. You are welcome again to another interesting Cafdil science lessons. And from Cafdil Studios, this is your teacher, Ernest Atto Bento. Kate, we began our new lessons treating types of plant roots. Our lesson number 1, we discussed types of plant roots. Today, we are going to go through another interesting lesson. As I told you in the first lesson, these lessons are based on the GES NACA curriculum you are also using at school. So we are on strand 1, diversity, lesson 2 on general properties of metals. This lesson is based on general properties of metals. And to remind you, you can enjoy all these interesting subscribe so that anytime interesting lessons like these are going on, you'll be notified for you to enjoy. So you can enjoy our lessons also on our social media handles I mentioned. Now let's begin the lesson. Let's look at our performance indicators. At the end of the lesson, this is the kind of performance I want to see, the kind of change I want to see in you. Anytime you go through a lesson, as I advise, when you go to school, any lesson that you go through, make sure you learn something new from that lesson. Anytime you wear your uniform and go to school, don't go to school and come back with the same knowledge you left the house in the morning with. Come back home with a new knowledge, even if it's one. So in this lesson, at the end, I would like you to give me 4 examples of metals. There are so many metals around us. You'll be able to give me 4 examples of metals. 2, state 4 general properties of metals. State 4 general properties of metals. So when you pay attention and we all go through this lesson, I believe you'll be able to answer all these questions on metals when I ask you. Good. Now let's look at metals. We are looking at the general properties of metal. What are metals at all? And even where do we get metals from? We get metals from rocks. Most metals, we get it from rocks. This is gold. And what the person is doing is called panning. So when they collect the soil, they wash the gold in running water. And that is what is destroying our water bodies. Those who do this galamsey and small-scale mining, this is the activity they do that destroy our water body. Because when you take the gold, you have to wash the soil in a running water so that it will bring the gold out. So we get most metals from rocks. We get most metals from rocks. So at the end of the day, they put the metals, the rocks, in a hot oven with extreme heat. It will just melt the metal so that they can shape it into different forms. So we get metals mostly from rocks. We get metals from rocks. So remember that most metals, we get it from rocks. Good. Now let's look at some examples of metals. Examples of metals we have around. Some examples are gold. We have gold. Gold is an example of metal. We also have steel. Steel is an example of metal. Steel is an example of metal. We have silver. Silver too is an example of metal. So gold, steel, silver are all examples of metals. We also have iron. Iron too is an example of metal. We have aluminium. Aluminium too is an example of metal. And then we have copper. Copper too is an example of metal. So iron, aluminium, gold are all examples of metals. Now that you know where we get metals from, and then some examples of metals, then let's move to the topic, the general properties of metals. What are properties? When we talk about properties, we mean what metals have. when somebody is no more, they make a will and they share the properties. So these properties are things that the person had. So when we talk about properties, what you have. So when we talk about properties of metals, we are talking about what metals have. What do you have? What metals have? So when I look inside your school bag, you have pencil, you have pen, you have your eraser, your math set, your textbooks, your exercise books. They are your properties, what you have. So we are going to look at what metals also have that can be used. Based on these properties, they can be used to make other objects. The number one property is that metals are hard. Metals are hard. Okay, let's check. Metals are hard and strong, meaning it is difficult to break into pieces. So let's check this activity. There's a brick made of gold, made of clay. So let's see. It is being crushed. So that means that bricks made of clay are not strong. So you see that the machine crushed it. There's a brick. We are going to crush. If it's hard and strong, it will never break into pieces. If it breaks into pieces, then it means it's not hard. So bricks are not hard. They are not hard and strong. So they broke into pieces. They broke into pieces. So we can say that bricks are not hard. Bricks are not hard. Let's look at it again. So we will test and then we will bring metal to see if the metal will also break into pieces. So let's look at metal. If it breaks into pieces, then it means the metal is not hard and strong. So you see, you are looking at whether it will break into pieces. It's not breaking. More force is being applied to see if it will break. It's not breaking. They're just compressing it, but it's not breaking. It can't even go anymore. Let's try another metal and see if it will break. This one too, it didn't break into pieces. So this tells us that metals are hard and strong. When we tried the brick, it broke into pieces, but metals did not break into pieces, meaning that metals are hard and strong. So this is one of the properties of metals. As for the brick, it just broke into pieces because it's made of clay, but metals are strong and hard, so it never broke into pieces. So examples of hard and strong metals are steel and iron. Steel and iron. That is why iron rods are used for building, because they are hard and strong. They will make the building strong. That is why we use iron rods in erecting pillars and also in building, because they are hard and strong. So remember that steel and iron are examples of hard and strong metals. Now let's go to malleability as another property of metal. Malleability. When we talk about malleability of metals, what do we mean? Malleability allows metals to be beaten or shaped into sheets. So if a metal can be beaten, as you see on your screen, can be beaten, this is the size of the metal, rectangle, and it is being hammered into sheets. If a metal can be hammered into sheets like this, then we say that that metal is malleable. That means that the metal can be beaten into sheets. The metal is malleable. It can be beaten into sheets. So if metals can be beaten into sheets, we call it malleability as a property. Good. Now let's look at examples of malleable metals. We have gold, we have aluminium, we have copper, we have brass. That means that all these metals can be beaten into sheets to make it flat so that we can use it to make other objects. So gold, aluminium, copper, and brass are all malleable metals. They are malleable metals because they can be shaped into sheets. Let's get to luster. When we say luster of metals, what does it mean? Luster as a property of metal, what does it mean? Luster means the shining property of metals. So metals that are shiny, that's what we call their property. It's called luster. That means that they are shiny. So if you look at the example of the metal here, it's shining. You can see it is shining. If you look at the jewelries we have here, they are shining. And that is the property we call luster. So let's look at some of the examples of luster metals. We have gold, we have aluminium, we have copper, we have brass. They are all shiny metals. They are all shiny metals. Gold, aluminium, copper, and then brass. They are all shiny metals. And we call it luster as their property. So when you hear luster as a property of metal, we are talking about the shining property of metals. Shining property of metals. Then let's go to ductility. Ductility. What is the meaning of ductility of metals? When we say metals are ductile, what does it mean? The ability of metals to be shaped into wires without breaking. That is the meaning of ductility. The ability of metals to be shaped into wires without breaking. That is the meaning of ductility. Shaping metals into wires without breaking. Shaping metals into wires without breaking. So let's look at some metals that can be shaped into wires without breaking. We have copper, we have steel, we have aluminium, we have iron. We have iron. You see how iron rods are? They are like big wires. So if iron cannot be shaped into wires, it will be very difficult to get iron rods from the metal iron. So copper, and we use copper too for electrical wires. It can be shaped into wires. So copper, aluminium, steel, and iron are all ductile metals because we can shape them into wires. So the property of metal to be shaped into wires, we call it ductility. Then we have good conductor of heat. Good conductor of heat. What does it mean when we say a metal is a good conductor of heat? Heat conductivity is the property of metal that allows heat to pass through easily without melting or burning. So if we say a metal is a good conductor of heat, that means that when heat passes through, as you see here, the heat passing through this metal, you see that it is heating. This metal will not melt or burn. So heat conductivity means that that metal cannot burn or melt when heat is applied to it. So when you look at this pot here, because heat can pass through without burning or melting, we can use it to cook. Good. Now let's look at this. Assuming you don't know the property of metals, and then I go to the market to buy a saucepan that I can use to cook. This one is made of wood. This one is made of plastic. This one is made of paper. So when you come to my kitchen, my saucepans are made of wood, plastic, or paper. That is what I use it to cook. What will come to your mind? Let's see what will happen. When I apply heat to it, what happens? They burn. They burn because they are poor conductors of heat. When heat passes through wood, it will burn it. When heat passes through plastic, it will melt it. When heat passes through paper, it will burn it into ashes. So when we say good conductivity of metals, that means that heat can pass through without burning or melting. That is another property of metal. Heat can pass through without burning or melting. So anytime you hear good conductivity of heat, then it means that that thing, if heat passes through, it will never burn or melt. Wood will burn. Metal, plastic will melt. Rubber will melt. Paper will burn to ashes. So they are poor conductors of heat. So let's look at another thing. If you look at this to cement saucepan, they are also poor conductors of heat because heat cannot pass through. If I have a saucepan like this made of cement and I'm using it to cook, I can sit down for years. My food will never be ready because cement saucepan is a poor conductor of heat. Heat cannot pass through. Heat cannot pass through. So when we say good conductor of heat, heat can pass through without burning or melting. When we say poor conductor of heat, when heat passes through, it can burn or melt, or heat cannot pass through at all. So those that can burn are papers and wood. They will burn to ashes. Plastic or rubber will melt. Saucepan, cement saucepan, heat can never pass through. So it's also a poor conductor of heat. So let's look at metals that are good conductors of heat. We have iron, we have aluminium, we have copper, we have silver. You see the pressing iron you use at home. Heat can pass through without melting or burning. So we can use it to iron our clothes because they are good conductors of heat. So these are examples of metals that are good conductors. Heat will pass through without burning it or melting it. Iron, aluminium, copper, and silver. Good. Then let's look at good conductor of electricity. That means that electric currents can pass through and then give energy to something. A load, give an energy to a load. So let's look at what good conductor of electricity is. So electrical conductivity is the property of metals that allow electric current to pass through easily to give power to gadgets and machines. So that means that there are some metals that electricity can pass through quickly and give power to some gadgets. There are some metals too that electricity cannot pass through. Or there are some objects or materials that electricity cannot pass through. But when you take some metals, they can. You see that we have different types of metals. And if you follow the examples, you see that not all the metals have all the properties. Not all of them. So there are some metals that are good conductors of electricity. So let's look at this example. There's a circuit. I know in class 4, class 5, as you are in P6, you did basic electronics. And you see that we have a bulb here, we have a battery here, we have our wire, we have the switch here. And then we have joined this with a metal. Because metal is a good conductor of electricity, it will light the bulb. If you look at the same bulb here, our battery here, our switch here, there's wood here. Wood is a poor conductor of electricity. So the power, when it reaches here, it will block it. So it will not pass through here to light this bulb. So some metals are good conductors of electricity. That means that electric currents can pass through and give power or energy to gadgets or machines. Good. For examples of metals that are good conductors of electricity, we have iron, we have aluminium, we have copper, we have silver, we have brass. They are all good conductors of electricity. Iron, aluminium, copper, silver, and then brass. They are all good conductors of electricity. Now let's go to sonorous. When we say a metal is sonorous, what does it mean? Sonorous metals are metals that produce sound when struck by something. So the sonorous is the property of metals to produce sound when struck by something. So this cymbal instrument, when I hit it together, it will make a sound. When I hit it together, it will make a sound. This ball, like a pendulum in the bell, if it hits the sides of the bell, it makes noise. That means that that metal is sonorous. If you look at guitar strings, they make noise when struck. That means that that metal is sonorous. So any metal that can produce sound when struck is called sonorous. Other than that, if you use wood to make a bell, when the bell rings, who will hear? Nobody will hear. So sonorous metals are metals that make sound. They are metals that make sound. So let's look at some examples of metals that are sonorous. We have iron, we have aluminium, we have copper. They are all examples of sonorous metals. We also have bronze, silver, and brass. So you can see that almost all the examples of metals, they are sonorous. They make sound when struck by something. Now, we have another metal that is liquid at room temperature. We know that metals are hard and strong. That is the first property we talked about. But we have some metals too that are liquid at room temperature. And that metal is called mercury. Mercury is a special metal because it is the only metal that is liquid at standard temperature. So we have one metal that is liquid at room temperature. So mercury is that special metal. So one of the properties of metals is that we have a metal that is also liquid at room temperature. And that metal is mercury. That metal is mercury. Okay. Kate, we have come to the end of the lesson on properties of metals. And today we looked at properties of metals having different kinds of properties that can be depended upon to do other materials. We looked at where metals are coming from, and we said that metals, we get metals from rocks. We get most metals from rocks. Secondly, we looked at some examples of metals like the gold, the steel, the aluminium, the brass, the bronze. They are all examples of metals. They are all examples of metal. Copper, they are all examples of metals. And we came to the properties of metals, what metals have that makes them metals. So we talked about a metal being hard and strong. There are some metals are hard and strong. It's very difficult to break it into pieces. We also looked at malleability of metals, ability of metals to be shaped into sheets. Ability of metals to be shaped into sheets, as you see. We also talked about the luster of metal. That is the shining property of metals. The shining property of metal as luster. We also looked at ductility, ability of metals to be shaped into wires. Ability of metals to be shaped into wires. We also looked at the heat conductivity of metals. When we say metal is a good conductor of heat, that means that heat can pass through without burning it or melting it. That means that that metal is a good conductor of heat. We also looked at electrical conductivity of metal, that some metals allow electricity to pass through so that it can give energy or power to gadgets and machines. Some metals too are sonorous. That means that they make noise when struck by something. Even if you take a saucepan at home and then you strike it by another metal, a spoon, you see that it will make noise. That noise is a property called sonorous. If you hear a bell, that noise of metal is what we call sonorous. And lastly, we looked at a metal that is liquid at room temperature, and that is mercury. So, Kate, these are some of the properties of metals we talked about in this lesson. Now, let's test ourselves on this lesson with these exercises. If a metal can easily be drawn into the shape of a wire? It is. If a metal can easily be drawn into the shape of a wire you see here, then it is sonorous, luster, ductile. Great, is ductile. So ductility means that it's a property of metal to be shaped into wires. 2. Which of these is not a property of metals? Soft, hard, malleable. Soft, hard, malleable. Which of these is not a property of most metals? Good, soft. Metals are hard and strong. They are not soft. The only liquid metal at room temperature is called, we have copper, we have mercury, we have iron. Great, it's mercury. Mercury. Another word for shiny metals is, you have ductile, you have luster, you have sonorous. Shiny metals. Good, luster, good. When you hit it, it rings like a bell. Which property of metal is that? When you hit it, it rings like a bell. Which property of metal is that? Luster, sonorous, malleability. Good, sonorous, good. You have all done well. And I believe you have enjoyed the lesson. Now, to wrap up, let's take this homework and try our hands on. 1. What are the 2 properties that make a metal good choice to use as wire in electronics? What are the 2 properties that make a metal a good choice to use as a wire in electronics? 2. State 3 examples of metals. And 3. State 4 general properties of metals. Now, kids, with the new edition of our science lesson, we have added the QR code as you see on your screen, the QR code. So as you did in the first lesson, use your phone to scan the QR code. So as I said, take your phone, go to QR code scanner, and then scan this exercise, this QR code. As we did in the first lesson, if you don't have it on your phone, go to Play Store or App Store and download it. When you finish downloading, you come and scan, and then you use it to begin your exercise. I'll give you some few minutes to do this activity. As I told you, if you scan it, if you download it, that is what the scanner you'll be using to scan all your exercises. And mind you, the exercises are timed. So if you delay, when you start the exercise, you will see the timer. So if you delay, it will not allow you to submit your tests. If you finish with your test, you begin by typing your name, your school, and your location. Then, when you finish, you answer the questions that follows. When you finish answering the question, go through to make sure you did the right thing. And then you come and click on Submit on the last page. And then when you submit, you see another button, View Results. As you view your results, you will also get your results here at Cafdil, and you will also see it. From time to time, you acknowledge all those who have been performing wonderfully well in these exercises. All the questions that you had wrong, the system will teach you the right answers. So if you don't have a phone or any device to try this, just copy this assignment and try your hands on. Those who can also scan, make sure you also copy it and try your hands on at your free time. You can always enjoy our lessons on our social media handles. On YouTube, you can go to Cafdil Edu, and on Facebook, you can go to Cafdil Cape Coast to enjoy all our lessons. Well done. You are welcome back. I believe you were all able to do the activity on your screen. Today we looked at metals as one of the materials around us. We looked at where we get metals from, some examples of metals and properties of metals. That is, the special things metals have. I believe you have learned something and you enjoyed the lesson as well. Until I come your way again with another interesting science lesson, this is your teacher, Ernest Ato Benson. Bye-bye.